we have to, just for this episode, just go back and clean up some of the stuff that's happened from free agency, some of the remaining deals that were to be done. I'm Will Gavin. I've got Brian T. Higgins Smith with me as well. And look,
I like that, Will. That's cool.
Let's start off with
Wait, breaking news. Breaking news again for the second straight week. Well, this is amazing.
Go on.
Aaron Rodgers has signed. No, never mind.
I really thought that was real then, and I was like opening.
I got you again.
I was like opening up, like, oh my God, what's Schefter tweeting and stuff like. We're going to talk Rodgers later in the show because it's getting ridiculous at this point.
No, not with Aaron Rodgers.
But let's start off with last night, the Cincinnati Bengals announcing that they have managed to finally lock down their 2-star wide receivers long-term. Ja'Marr Chase agreeing to a record $161 million contract. It's an extension, so it's 182 over the next 5 years. Ja'Marr Chase and Tee Higgins signs a $115 million deal. Can be worth over $30 million a year with incentives. So they have the highest paid wide receiver in football and potentially a top 5 wide receiver in football as well if the two are paid as such. And look, it means
because they won the AFC Championship.
Yeah,
they won their division, they made the playoffs, and they're rewarding greatness. I love it, Will.
And look, because the team that won the Super Bowl last year in the Eagles have $108 million per year invested in their quarterback and their top 2 wide receivers.
Yeah.
There is a world where this works, right?
Yeah.
$124 million per year invested in Joe Burrow, in Tee Higgins, and Ja'Marr Chase, and those are 3 guys who you do not want to out of your building.
It's almost 50% of their salary cap, which is mathematically, financially, just fascinating in so many ways.
And look, the kind of the things to get off the chest before anything else is to say that if they'd done this earlier, if they'd done Tee Higgins 2 years ago, if they'd got Ja'Marr Chase signed last year, they would be saving approximately, as of this year, $25 million to $30 million on the cap.
Which is a couple of good players in the NFL.
Well, it's either Trey Hendrickson plus a couple of role players, or it's 4 or 5 starters on a defense which needs 6 or 7 starters. So it's not an insignificant amount of money. The point is that yes, these players deserve these contracts, but yet again, Brian, the way that the Bengals do business is just farcical.
How many times have we written stories at talkSPORT.com where we'll use a pull quote, so it'll be, a quote that kind of gets you into the story. It's your hook, right? And you're basically repeating it because it's worst run organization in the NFL, horrible ownership, on and on and on. The Cincinnati Bengals, for whatever reason, the Dallas Cowboys, there's a few, Cleveland Browns, there's a few teams that just don't do it right. And for the Bengals, it's been an issue for years to the point that, Joe Burrow literally spent the last year publicly campaigning like he was a politician that Cincinnati could not let, obviously, Ja'Marr Chase go. He's one of the best receivers in the NFL. Justin Jefferson, we can have that debate. And couldn't let Tee Higgins go. Tee Higgins' mom reportedly at some point got into it. This has been a back and forth for a year now that the Bengals have created. Because what I always find so funny, Will, is that in the end, it'd be different if they didn't pay them. Or you made a really hard decision and you signed Ja'Marr Chase and you traded Tee Higgins. Or you let one go. Like, whatever it is, they paid them. So if you pay them, you were always going to pay them. Why not do it earlier? Why not be in a better salary cap position? But in the end, they had to do it. And it reminded me very much of last year at the start of the season with the Dallas Cowboys, with Dak Prescott, to where everyone freaks out about the contract and, oh my gosh, but they had no choice. It was their choice to wait that long. But, the Cincinnati Bengals, right now, they're not a true, at this moment, contender. But they have something. They're in the conversation because they have Joe Burrow, because they have Ja'Marr Chase, and because they have Tee Higgins. And that is a threesome. That's a trio that's very dangerous. That gives you one of the best offenses in the NFL that has continual upside. They can put up 40 points a week on you. If you lose Ja'Marr Chase what do you have? If you lose Joe Burrow's best receiver, what do you have? So the Bengals had no choice to do this. It just doesn't make sense salary cap wise. It doesn't help them as they try to get past Kansas City, Buffalo, Baltimore, a loaded AFC. And I always say, and we talk about this all the time, as much as we want to talk about talent and numbers and stats, it's more and more, just like Premier League over here, it's more and more of a financial game. You have to get it all right. It's great that they paid them, but they could have spent that money, parts of that money, a lot better elsewhere.
And look, I'm kind of, as we regularly do, I'm speaking out both sides of my mouth to an extent here, because I do think that the teams who spend really big in free agency are rarely the ones that find longer term success. And yes, there are a few teams who have done, I think like teams like the Panthers and Patriots were so both talent poor and also cap rich that it was okay they went and overpaid.
They had to do something,
guys,
yeah.
Right? But I look on that defensive side of the ball and I see needs at off-ball linebacker, of which there were a fair few available in this window. See big needs in the defensive backfield, of which a bunch of corners got very similar deals, a lot of whom could have helped this Bengals system. And Al Golden, their new defensive coordinator, they need pass rush help. And look, they are number one in quarterbacks, number one in wide receiver spending. They are number two in quarterback spending. They are 28th in offensive line spending.
And that's where it gets really interesting to me, because we talk a lot also about team building and roster construction. And this stuff isn't boring. This is actually the fun stuff of the inside of the NFL of how these teams are built. And we have such incredible recent evidence with Kansas City, with Philadelphia, San Francisco, when they were in there, how they put it all together. Obviously, the 49ers aren't a Super Bowl contender anymore. But if you look at this Bengals roster and how it, just exactly what you said, where their money is spent, it wasn't that long ago I was talking with an NFL coach, and I was covering a team, you can probably figure it out, and they were adamant that they were not going to spend big premium money on their star wide receiver. I'm talking about DeAndre Hopkins and the Houston Texans, and the Houston Texans traded DeAndre Hopkins and obviously did not get much for him, and that ended up at the time setting the franchise back a couple years, and the fans absolutely hated it. But the Texans and their management were absolutely adamant that you could win a Super Bowl without a number one wide receiver. The Patriots were proof of that. That was the feeling. Cincinnati has gone completely opposite of that. I'm not in any way saying you had to get rid of Ja'Marr Chase. I would have paid Ja'Marr Chase. Some people are obviously worth it in the NFL. But if you're going to do that, you want it to benefit you or have it be 50-50. This doesn't feel 50-50 to me. This feels like the Bengals pushed and pushed because of ownership. They've had ownership issues for a long time now. They left themselves no room, just like the Dallas Cowboys. And I'm not sure that this Cincinnati Bengals team will be any better next year. They're going to put up crazy points. Guess what? They did that last year. Now, if they start better, it's a different conversation. But this is the team. You laid it out perfectly. Well, this is a team with holes. They might lose their best defender. It's a tough AFC, and I'm not sure that the Bengals have really helped themselves this offseason, because we knew Chase was coming back. They didn't add anything with Ja'Marr Chase. He was coming back. They just paid him a lot of money.
It's also the fact that, yeah, Chase, Higgins, Burrow, all great. You pay those guys. And ideally, Trey Hendrickson as well. And like I said, you would have had that money if you'd got this done earlier. But the other moves that they've made this offseason don't make a huge amount of sense to me. You've given Mike Gesicki, who you probably could have got back on a similar deal to what he had last year, 1 year, maybe $5 million. And yet they brought him back on a multi-year deal in a year where we've got a draft where 20 tight ends are projected to go in the top 100 picks. Yeah. 20. That's
a heavy. I've talked to Matt Miller about that from ESPN. It's a heavy, it's heavy running back and heavy tight end.
And they have paid BJ Hill huge money this year, a guy who underperformed and was injured at a time when interior defensive line is really strong in this year's draft. It's about the way that you allocate. You've got to sit down and you've got to look at the bigger picture. And I'm sure that teams do this.
The pie, the big pie.
You look at it and you go, right, we know that we're going to have to allocate these huge funds here, and here's what's strong in the draft, and here's our board for it. We're going to have to let this guy and this guy go. We know that they were contributors to us. We'd love to keep them, but we know that they are cheap and easy replacements with guys on rookie deals who are going to be earning less than $1 million a year because we picked them in the third round, but they can be a contributor this year. And look, they don't have a wealth of picks. They've got their own picks from rounds 1 through 6, and if Trey Hendrickson does get traded, you imagine that probably is a 2 at this point, with the fact that they'll need someone will need to give them a new contract, so that gives them a little bit more help. But yeah, like you said, they are still a contender because, as Joe Burrow said earlier in his career, the Super Bowl window is open while I'm here.
And I love that. And I love Joe
you know,
Burrow. I mean, Joe Burrow is undoubtedly one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. He's had a bad run recently with injuries and a bad start. I love his confidence. I want, from an NFL perspective, I want Cincinnati back in the playoffs. I feel like the NFL, modern NFL, is more interesting with Joe Burrow in it. But it's hard, man. I mean, you know, you're not just dealing with the Eagles and the best of the NFC. You're dealing with Lamar Jackson. It's a hard division. You're dealing with Lamar Jackson. You're dealing with Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, who overall aren't going anywhere. The Texans in the AFC South. You look across the AFC. The Buffalo Bills. You got to be better than the Buffalo Bills next year. It's you know, I like their offensive talent. I don't know what else the Bengals have, and they've got to nail the draft, and they've had draft success before, but they're in a tough spot that they also put themselves in.